I've always loved the quiet of the pastures, just the sound of the wind blowing through the tall grasses and the occasional move from my cattle. My ranch had been in the family for generations, and I prided myself on running it the way my grandfather had taught me. So when I spotted a strange car parked at the edge of my property one afternoon, my instinct was to approach it with caution. I'd had a few issues with the HOA in the past, but I wasn't prepared for what was coming. I walked over and found a woman standing by the fence, holding a clipboard. Her name was Karen, and as soon as I saw her, I knew I was in for a headache. Karen was one of those HOA members who thought she had the authority to tell people how to live. She was always trying to enforce rules that didn't apply to my property. The moment she saw me, she started talking like she owned the place. "Good afternoon," she said, putting her clipboard in front of her like she was some kind of official. "I'm here to post the HOA rules for the pasture area. You need to make sure your land is in compliance." I stood there, blinking at her. The pasture had been here long before any HOA or subdivision even existed. It wasn't part of their jurisdiction, and everyone around here knew it. But Karen was intent on changing that. "Excuse me," I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "What do you mean, post rules?" Karen smiled like she'd caught me off guard. "The HOA has decided that your pasture is not up to the standards set by our community. I'm here to inform you of the guidelines. We need to make sure there's proper fencing, animal containment, and all the other things that go with it." My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd been raising cattle on that pasture for over 40 years, and I had never had an issue. The fences were sturdy, the cattle were well kept, and the land had been managed with care. This was my property, and no HOA member had the right to dictate what I did with it. "I've been farming this land long before any HOA showed up," I said, trying to keep my cool. "There are no community guidelines that apply here. This is my land, and I'll decide how it's run, not you." Karen didn't seem to care much about what I said. She flipped through her clipboard and pointed to a set of papers. "The HOA has been getting complaints about your pasture. It doesn't meet the standards they've set. I've been asked to post these rules, and you'll need to follow them." I was fuming, but I knew I needed to stay calm. I had to figure out what my options were. "I'm not posting anything," I said firmly. "If you don't leave my property, I'll have to call the sheriff." Karen didn't back down. "I'm just doing my job," she said, as though that somehow made it okay. She started walking toward the pasture fence, clipboard still in hand, as if she was about to start measuring something. I knew I needed help. I wasn't going to let this woman or her HOA push me around. I pulled out my phone and called the state range manager. I'd worked with him before on land management issues, and I knew he was the one person who would have the authority to shut this down. "Hello, Jim. I've got a problem. There's an HOA representative out here, and she's trying to post rules on my property. She says my pasture doesn't meet their standards, and I need to follow their guidelines. Can you come out here and help me sort this out?" Jim knew exactly what I was talking about. "I'm on my way," he said, and I hung up, feeling a little bit of relief. While I waited for Jim to arrive, Karen continued to move around the property, clipboard still in hand, writing down notes as though she had some right to inspect my land. My frustration was growing, but I kept my distance. I wasn't going to let her provoke me any further. When Jim finally arrived, he drove up in his truck, stepping out with a confident air that only years of experience in land management could provide. He looked at me, then at Karen, who was still standing by the fence with her clipboard. "What's going on here?" Jim asked, his voice calm but firm. Karen immediately launched into her explanation, talking about the HOA's guidelines and the complaints they'd received about my pasture. She claimed the land wasn't up to code, and that it was her job to enforce these rules. Jim listened quietly, his hands in his pockets, before he turned to Karen. "Ma'am, I'm the state range manager for this area, and I can assure you that your HOA does not have jurisdiction over this property. This land has been used for grazing for generations. It's zoned for agriculture, and there are no HOA rules that apply here." Karen's face turned red, but she wasn't done yet. "But the community has spoken," she said, her voice rising slightly. "We have to maintain certain standards for the neighborhood." Jim shook his head. "The community may have concerns, but the rules you're talking about don't apply to this land. If there's a problem, it's a local zoning issue, and that's something you need to take up with the county, not the H." I could feel the tension lifting as Jim spoke. He was standing up for me, and I knew this was the moment that would end the whole thing. Karen looked like she was about to argue again, but Jim cut her off. "I suggest you pack up and go back to the HOA office. You're not posting anything here, and I'll be sure to follow up with the county if this continues." She hesitated for a moment, then turned and walked back to her car, muttering something under her breath. Jim and I stood there watching her go, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. "Thanks, Jim," I said, feeling a huge weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't sure how I was going to handle this on my own. Jim smiled and clapped me on the back. "No problem. That's what I'm here for. The range laws are clear, and the HOA can't just make up their own rules." As Karen's car disappeared down the road, I felt a deep sense of relief. The pasture was mine, and no one, especially not some overzealous HOA member, was going to take it from me. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the pasture, watching the cattle graze peacefully. Everything was as it should be, just the way it had been for decades. I knew I had done the right thing, standing up for my land and my family's legacy. If you've ever had to deal with an overreaching HOA or a property dispute, let me know where you're watching from and share your experience in the comments. And if you found this story helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.